First time, brothers. Let's roll. Welcome, everyone, to Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We're your hosts and co-founders of FantasyForesight.com, coming to you from the Rambo Fixture Company studios. I'm Ben.
And I'm Jay.
You ready to get rolling, Jay?
You know it. Let's do this.
All right, let's go. Welcome in, everyone. It is Wednesday, May 22nd, and we have the first of a very special 4-part draft strategy series with another person on with us for the first time ever. Jay, how you doing tonight, brother?
Ben, you know I'm doing great tonight. This is a moment we have been waiting for a long time. We are going to get to introduce our newest member of the Fantasy Foresight family. I cannot wait to dive into his in-depth analysis of the QB position. Let's go, buddy.
Yeah, man, looking at the 5-year history of how the consensus ADP QBs finish and actual fantasy finishes, that study goes right into the philosophy that we have at Fantasy Foresight. Everything's about the numbers, the probability, the cold hard truth that is total foresight at FantasyForesight.com. So when you look at Steve's deep dive statistical analysis, that supports so many of the concepts that we've been preaching on our review pods. And man, I'm excited to dive right into it.
And you saying all of that will let our listeners know exactly why we brought in the individual that we did. Go to FantasyForesight.com, check out the newest tab on the website, the Foresight Encyclopedia. And for the first time ever on this podcast, I get to introduce our newest team member, Steve, the Foresight Encyclopedia, blog extraordinaire, and numbers guru.
Woo!
Ben, Jay, what can I say except I am absolutely thrilled to be part of the Foresight family. I also want to thank you guys at this point in time for the opportunity to not only be part of the Foresight family, but also join you on this podcast. You guys know how much I love fantasy football and spend all my free time trying to research for my fantasy football leagues. And I'm just jacked to be on this podcast and have a chance to share what I've been researching and putting so much time into with you guys here on the show tonight.
Great to have you. We're thrilled to have you. And let's get right into it. So, ladies and gentlemen, here's how this is going to work. We're going to look at how every ADP QB from 1 to 12 has finished over the last 5-year period. Steve's going to walk you through that. Then I'm going to come in and hit you with a little bit of different look on the statistics. And then Jay's going to talk to you about the current fantasy football calculator ADP for 12-team PPR as of today, Wednesday, May 22nd, to give you a current perspective look on what the historic trends are telling us you should and should not do when it comes to your positional draft strategy heading into the 2019 season.
Oh, absolutely, Ben. I cannot wait to dig into this. We're going to take a look back, see how these quarterbacks did, where they went in drafts, how they finished. Steve brought it with his deep dive analysis. Ben added a couple of interesting analytical wrinkles to bring you an episode that we are all really proud of. The culmination of this draft strategy series will be posted in the draft prep tab at FantasyForesight.com. All right, guys, you ready? Let's go.
Yes, sir. All right, Steve. First, let's put this study into context for everyone. Where were we getting your ADP info from? And this was in 12-team PPR redraft format, correct?
Oh, yeah, exactly, Ben. So what I did is I went out to fantasyfootballcalculator.com. That's pretty much just the place that I always like to go get historical ADP data from. I really like it because it tends to focus on what the general public's doing. So that's where I got that information from.
Okay, Steve, is it a similar approach for the fantasy finishes as well? And I'd imagine that we're focusing on weeks 1 through 16 because that's what the fantasy season is. Am I correct?
Yeah, Jay, you're precisely right. I concentrate on weeks 1 through 16 because, like you said, a vast majority of fantasy football seasons culminate with a championship in week 16. And I like to use, it's actually an affiliate partner of Fantasy Foresight, fantasypros.com, and that's where all these fantasy finishes are coming from.
Perfect. All right, fellas, the table is set. Let's get into this.
All right, guys. Steve, how did the ADP QB1 from the last 5 years do?
Jay, I have to say it's pretty disastrous, actually. I was a little startled when I did this to see just how low a lot of these guys that are the consensus QB1s actually finished. I mean, so you had Aaron Rodgers just this past season. He came out looking the best out of all of them. So he was going at the 307 last year and finished QB4, which I think you guys would both agree with me. You really want a higher finish than QB4 out of a quarterback you're taking in the middle part of the third round.
No doubt.
And so that's saying something, that's as good as it gets. So you had Aaron Rodgers in 2017, finishes the QB 28. You had Cam Newton in 2016, finish as the QB 16. Then you had Andrew Luck in 2015, finishes the QB 28.
Ouch.
And then in 2014, and let me just preface this by saying a QB5 finish might not seem that horrible out of Peyton Manning in 2014, but whenever you're taking him at the 110,
wow,
you have to get a lot better finish than QB5 out of that guy. I mean, that will destroy your fantasy season. You have to get, because Peyton threw for 55 touchdowns in 2013. So if you're not going to get that out of a quarterback you're taking at the 110, you're almost maybe flushing your fantasy season down the toilet by making that selection.
You're absolutely right, Steve. And so when you summarize what his study tells us about the ADP QB1s over the last 5 years, 40% of the time you're getting what we're referring to as an elite quarterback in 12-team leagues that's going to be your top 6. 0% of the time beyond that are you getting a top 12 quarterback. Another 20% of the time you're getting a streamer type 13 to 24, and then 40% of the time you're getting QB bad. When you are investing that type of draft equity into a quarterback that early in your draft, you better hit a bullseye. Otherwise, your season is sunk from the start.
Okay, guys, now for 2019, the current QB1 this season going at the 306 mark, right in the middle of the third round, is none other than Pat Mahomes. Now, what you guys just told me reaffirms some of my hesitation on Mr. Mahomes this season because of his lack of weapons or question mark of weapons on that offense. Now I'm seeing the data that the QB1 in a given season has a 50-50 shot of finishing there at the end of the season. And guys, this is huge.
Well, this is the QB1 overall, Jay,
Right.
Not just a QB1. And I mean, when you're talking about taking a quarterback that early, you're not taking him to be anything other than the highest scoring player in all of fantasy football. That is a very hard, precise pick to nail, and it's much easier to wait later. And then when Steve also flips this study on its head and takes a look at it from the reverse angle, from how did the actual QB1 in fantasy football every season, where was that quarterback drafted? Over the last 5 seasons, the actual QB1 was drafted as early as the 403 spot, very early in the 4th round, as late as the 10-11 spot, very late in the 10th round. And when you take the midpoint and average of that over 5 years, it's the 709 and the 707, middle of the 7th round pick. So that's telling you that the actual QB1 over the last 5 seasons, you're typically going to find around the 7th round, middle to late 7th round, not in the middle of the 3rd round where Patrick Mahomes is currently going, like Jay said.
This is just crazy. The fact that the QB1 has a 50-50 shot of finishing as just a QB1, top 12 overall, is averaging a 16th place finish at the quarterback position over the last 5 years. You're asking me to pay a 3rd round price. I know I can get the QB1 in the 7th round historically. This is eye-opening.
When you tell me that over the last 5 years, the ADP QB1's average finish is QB 16, that will straight up lose you your fantasy season from the get-go.
Okay, Steve, you've got to tell me, how does the QB2 in ADP fare over the last 5 years? Is it that volatile?
Well, Jay, so the QB2s, while it's not disastrous like the QB1s, it's still, in my opinion, not somebody that you want to be drafting. So last year we had Deshaun Watson, going at the 410, finished as QB5. Not terrible, QB5, but still, with the 410 and you're drafting him as a QB2, you don't get a return on investment with that pick. The previous season before that, Tom Brady at the 306 finishes QB5. Not a good ROI on that one. Then you have, before that, Aaron Rodgers at the 403. He does finish QB1. This would be the exception out of all the QB2s. This is the only guy that actually provided a positive return on investment from where you're drafting him at. 2015, Aaron Rodgers at the 303 finishes QB7. That to me is bust. And then Drew Brees at the 207 in 2014 goes QB4. And again, it's not disastrous like you see with those QB1s. I mean, overall, they average a QB4 finish, but you are drafting them at the QB2 and you are spending high draft equity on all these guys. So in my opinion, it still doesn't look good. So we're looking here now at the QB1s and 2s, and it's like, I don't want to be drafting guys this high at the quarterback position.
Yeah, we're all three in agreement that we are of the max value mindset when it comes to every single pick in your draft. And like Steve said, if you're drafting the QB2 and he's finishing 4, 5, 7 most of the time, that is a negative return on your investment. So I understand that 80% of the time over the last 5 years, you're getting a top half QB1, an elite QB1, but it's not the QB2 overall that you have paid for. And again, if you miss on that at that point in your draft, it can be just disastrous, where if you're patient and diligent and you wait on a quarterback and you miss in the 9th, 10th, 11th round, you are much better positioned to recover from that mistake.
But looking at those numbers, I can sleep much better at night if I do happen to invest in a higher round quarterback at the QB2 spot, knowing at least he's going to finish as a QB1 overall in fantasy.
You're absolutely right. If you're going to be a renegade, you're not going to listen to us. You're not going to be disciplined. You're not going to wait on quarterback. Definitely go with the ADP QB2 instead of the ADP QB1, at least according to the data that we've seen over the last 5 seasons.
That is a great segue, Ben, for me to tell you that the QB2 overall this year is Andrew Luck, currently going in the 4th round with the 10th selection, the 410 overall.
I mean, that's, again, really high draft equity for any quarterback. We are big time fans of Captain Luck on this podcast. We know that Steve agrees with us, but for the actual quarterback 2 overall in fantasy, each of the last 5 years, you're looking at a draft range of as early as the 210 spot, late 2nd round, to absolutely free.
Crazy.
That again tells me that 410 is just too much. You're not guaranteed that you're going to get the overall QB2 that you're paying for, and the medium and average is the late 9th, early 10th. So there's going to be a trend by the time we get to the end of this where you should really wait till the mid to late rounds of your drafts to draft a quarterback.
Okay, so what I've seen so far and what I've heard so far is that drafting the QB1 overall is a 50-50 gamble on whether or not he's even going to finish as a QB1, period. The ADP QB2 overall at least has an 80% chance of finishing as a QB1, but will likely not live up to his QB2 overall value. Steve, tell me about the ADP QB3.
Well, Jay, I hate to use the word disastrous once again, but I can't think of a better way to actually describe it. The only thing that makes it not as, I guess, atrocious as the QB1s is the fact we are spending less draft equity on QB3s, but it doesn't look good. I mean, Tom Brady last season finished as QB13. Breeze the year before that finished as QB9. And if you remember in 2017, it was about as underwhelming as a QB9 season as you could possibly get, probably. Russell Wilson in 2016 finishes as a QB12. And then, my man, I miss you, Peyton Manning. But 2015, that was the year that Peyton Manning's shoulder went all like ramen noodle on us. He was going at the 507 in 2015, finished as QB 35.
Oh no.
That was the season, where the wheels fell off. I'm just glad that guy got the ride off into the sunset with a Super Bowl ring. And in 2014, Aaron Rodgers, the only one out of all these guys that actually returned on his draft spot, which still was steep at the 210, finished at QB2.
Wow.
So again, just a quick summation. We're through the top 3 QBs, and we've only seen 2 guys meet or exceed where they were being drafted.
2 individuals over the last 5 years. That's crazy. For the ADP QB3, you're paying an elite QB price and you're getting ripped off 80% of the time over the last 5 seasons.
I am shocked at what we are revealing here, guys. I mean, I understand that we're talking third, fourth round here, but seeing the lack of return on investment is alarming. I had no idea, honestly. This is shocking. So this season's QB3 currently is going in the 5th round, middle of the 5th, and it is Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, and I mean, we love A-Rod on this podcast. A lot of people in the fantasy community would not be surprised if he had a very bounce-back type of season. And I'll tell you what, even though he's going in the middle of the 5th round, which is earlier than the earliest, the actual QB3 overall in fantasy has been drafted. So they have been drafted as early as the 601 spot, the very beginning of the 6th round, and as late as the 912 spot at the very end of the 9th round. So the median and average, again, is right at the beginning of the 8th round.
The earliest a QB3 overall has been drafted in the last 5 years is the ADP of 601.
Yes, sir.
That is insane. Now, everybody listening, think about that in context when you are looking at rankings and when you are planning your draft. My goodness. All right, Steve, it's been a roller coaster so far. Tell us about the ADP QB4 overall.
Well, Jay, speaking of roller coasters, I mean, this is just going to be one of those valleys that the roller coaster ride's hitting, because when it came to the QB4s, if you drafted one of these guys at the QB4 spot, you might not have necessarily killed your season, but not a single one of these guys actually returned on the place in which you drafted them at. So really quick, I'll just go through them. You had last year, Russell Wilson finish as the QB8. 2017, you had Matt Ryan finish as QB15. You had Andrew Luck in 2016, finish as the QB5. You had Drew Brees in 2015, finish as QB6. And then Matt Stafford, which I was a little shocked to see old Matty Stafford going as high as QB4 in fantasy football. But, you know, this is literally a half decade ago now. At the 412, he gave you a QB15 finish. So you definitely had some ups and downs with this QB4 group. But like I said, not a single one of them gave you a positive return on investment for where you were drafting them.
No, you're talking about, once again, elite draft equity, and you're paying for an elite QB4. You're not ever, over the last half decade, one time getting a QB4. The best is a 1-spot loss to QB5. I'm sorry. I want wide receivers and running backs at that point in my draft, and I will roll the dice on whoever is left later on, and I'm going to be better for it.
I am running for the hills from quarterbacks now. You guys have literally scared me away from quarterbacks, period. My goodness.
Steve, we did too good of a job. We want to keep him drafted early quarterback.
Look at this picture we're painting. I cannot believe it. Okay, so this season, the QB4 overall, a position that has never returned on its investment, is Baker Mayfield at the 5'10" spot.
No.
Now, what do you have to say, you two?
This is what I have to say. Baker May and the Browns are going to take a big time step this season. And Baker, I have no doubt, is going to finish as a QB1, but it might be more of a back end QB1. And as much as I love my guy, I know Steve totally agrees with me that the 5'10" spot in the late 5th round is still too early to draft even our beloved franchise Browns quarterback.
No, absolutely, Ben. I mean, I believe there's an opportunity for him to possibly return on investment, but he hasn't done it yet. And I think a lot of people look past the fact the Browns are going to have a much improved defense this season, and there just might not be enough volume that some of these other guys might bring to the table that's going to command that kind of a finish. And I hate to say it because, and that's the thing, Baker Mayfield could very much so be the NFL MVP this season if things break the right way for the Cleveland Browns and Baker. But as far as being a fantasy MVP, it's not. I just won't take that gamble at that point in time in the draft. And I hate to say that because I really want to.
Yeah, it's just not yet. And again, it doesn't mean that he's going to have a bad season. It's just when you are spending a 4th, 5th, 6th round even pick on a quarterback, you want an elite finish. and you're not giving yourself much room to gain a positive return on your investment if you're drafting the 4th overall quarterback taken. So, and overall, over the past 5 years, the actual QB4s have gone anywhere from that 110 spot, late 10th, as Steve alluded to in 2014 with Peyton Manning, all the way to a free draft pick. So in the last 5 years, you have been able to get a QB4 overall for free. On average, it's the late 8th and mid 9th. Again, you see a trend here. The actual top finishers in fantasy football are on average being drafted more in the mid to late rounds than the early rounds of these ADP QB quote studs.
I am staring at this number. The QB4 overall has gone anywhere from the first round in drafts to undrafted.
Yeah.
What? I mean, I'm speechless, guys. I mean,
the contrast of the two studies, first off, was a brilliant idea by our guy, Steve. But when you can really look at the perception versus reality, the perception that these great quarterbacks of yesteryear are going to automatically repeat their performance versus the reality of where you actually get those guys is by waiting for all of the overzealous people that are still looking at the year before, and you're doing your homework and smartly taking what the draft has given to you, remaining adaptable, remaining flexible, and coming away with the better squad.
All right. Well, I'm starting to lose hope here that I'm ever going to hear good news on this list. So, Steve, tell us about the ADP QB5 overall in the last 5 years.
Well, Jay, I have a little bit of good news for you.
Yeah.
The QB5, when I did this overall, is probably like the sweetest spot out of all the QB positions in this study. So you actually have Russell Wilson in 2017. And you have Andrew Luck in 2014 actually come out of this as the QB1 in all of fantasy football, coming out of that ADP QB5 spot. And you still have Drew Brees last year finished as a QB7. And Drew Brees, you see his name a lot on this list. You see Drew Brees finished as a QB3 in 2016. So QB5 I saw was actually like a pretty nice spot, with the exception of Big Ben Roethlisberger in 2015, who finished as QB22. And without even looking, and I'm sure we could all just make a pretty educated guess, I'm sure in 2015 Big Ben probably missed some games, because last year was the exception to the rule. Big Ben usually always misses some time.
Yeah, he's soft. So like you said, Steve, this is the first time on this list where 60% of the time you're getting a positive return on your investment. So what that tells me is, if again you're going to be stubborn and overzealous and not listen to our guy Steve and not listen to Fantasy Foresight and the Foresight Encyclopedia, and you're determined to take a quarterback early, looking at you, Jay, QB5 is the soonest you should consider that, period.
Okay, finally, some good news. So who is the QB5 right now in 2019? The answer to that question is Deshaun Watson, going late 5th round. So tell me about where QB5 overalls have actually been drafted historically, Ben. Is this a fair price to pay for the QB5 with Deshaun Watson?
I mean, he's currently being drafted at the 5'11 spot at the end of the 5th round, according to fantasyfootballcalculator.com. Historically, over the last 5 years, the actual QB5 is being drafted anywhere from the 207 spot, mid to late 2nd round, as late as the 1108 spot, which is the mid to late 11th round. And then you're looking at a 5-year average ADP of the 508 spot, late 5th round, and a midpoint of the 702 spot. So to me, I am going to take my range on the high and low between the mid and the average for each one of these. So an acceptable range to go after the actual QB5 in drafts based on this study is anywhere from the 508 spot to the 702 spot. So if you're telling me that our guy Deshaun Watson's going at the 511 spot, you have our official Foresight blessing to pull the trigger on that dude.
All I hear is that the QB5 is the sweet spot to take in drafts. Right now, that is Deshaun Watson. His average draft position is right on par in a decent value where he's going in drafts. I finally have some good news.
You're so greedy. Every single season, your objective going into the draft is to find that 40-point QB1,
Yes.
so you don't have to worry about streaming or anything else all year.
You know it. All right. Let's keep it up. I want some good news. Let's go. Steve, QB6 ADP overall in the last 5 years. He was amazing too, right?
Sorry, Jay, no good news here.
Come on.
So I mean, just let me start out by saying the average finish of QB6s has been QB12. So right there just should tell you all you need to know. But I mean, we've seen starting in 2018 and working our way back to 2014. I mean, we've seen finishes of QB10, QB19, QB19.
Gross.
Tom Brady's the exception here. In 2015, he went QB2 as his finish on the season, and you could have drafted him as a QB6. And then Tom Brady, though, the previous season to that in 2014, finished as QB8, so he didn't return on your investment there. So, I mean, overall as a group, not good as far as the ROI is concerned. And like I said, all you have to hear is, hey, these guys have been averaging a QB12 finish.
Yeah, 80% of the time you are getting ripped off for the QB price that you are paying, and it just furthers our concept that, contrary to what Jay wants to hear, you got to wait on quarterbacks.
All right, so this season, the QB6 overall is Matt Ryan, and he is going middle of the 6th round. And Ben, I'm going to steal some thunder right now. The QB6 has gone anywhere from late in the 5th round to the 13th round, with an average of a 9th round selection. And Matt Ryan is going mid to late 6th round. So I don't see value there. I see tumultuous return on investment, and now I've lost all hope once again.
I mean, the actual fantasy QB6 over the last 5 years has been drafted as high as the 509 spot late in the 5th round, as late as the 1301 spot early in the 13th round. And the acceptable range, like we just talked about, is the mid and the average. Both are the 905 spot. So to me, if you're going after the QB6, Steve's historical data tells us that over the last 5 seasons, being asked to pay a 608 for QB6 is just 3 rounds too high.
Okay, we have finished the top 6 quarterback selections. Now, we're starting the downhill. There's got to be better value in the back half of this, right, Steve? Let's take a look at the ADP QB7 overall.
So, Jay, I mean, you're kind of right. There's going to be a little bit of good news, but it's going to be, and we'll get to it at the very tail end of all of this. But yeah, as far as the QB7s are concerned, I mean, kind of a mixed bag, just like we've been talking about with all these guys so far. So you had Kirk Cousins last year finish as the QB12. You had Marcus Mariota finish as the QB18. Before that, you had Ben Roethlisberger as the QB13. So those 3 guys there, I mean, that's yuck. I mean, yeah, you're taking those guys.
And that's the last 3 seasons. I mean, you're seeing that trend.
Exactly. And these are all guys that you're spending 6th to 7th round picks on when you probably do want to be filling out your starting lineup. And I would even recommend start filling out your bench before you take a quarterback, but I digress. And then you did have Russell Wilson in 2015 come up with a QB3 performance, and then Matt Ryan in 2014 come up with a QB7. So, you know, Matt Ryan met his actual draft position, and then you had Russell Wilson exceed it, but that's all you see there.
Yeah, that's still only 40% of the time, where 20% of the time you meet it or exceed it, another 20% of the time you're exceeding it. So it's just, again, you're not seeing the type of max value that you like to see when you're coming at it from a max value draft standpoint. You're just not.
Okay, so our QB7 overall right now is Drew Brees, and he is going early in the 7th round. Now, QB7s have gone as early as the 3rd round, as late as the 10th round, but here we go, guys. Here is appropriate value. They've averaged between late 6th and early 7th rounds.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, Drew Brees currently going at the 703 spot. The 5-year historic midpoint and average says that the late 6th, early 7th is the way to go. That falls within that range. So that's acceptable. This is where you have to do your homework and differentiate based on the player, where he's at in the situation. But Jay's got a big smile on his face because he's being told that he's allowed to draft a quarterback. He doesn't have to wait till Christmas morning. He can open all his presents on Christmas Eve.
No, honestly, I was going to say, look at Drew Brees. He's appropriately valued junk, because I'm looking at the QB7s giving me a basic 20% chance of meeting or exceeding value and an 80% chance of not meeting value. So I've got appropriately priced junk.
I mean, okay, yeah, that's not what I thought I was going to hear from you. I think I was looking for you
I'm full of
looking for any.
surprises.
Yeah, you are, because usually you're looking for any excuse to draft a quarterback as early as possible.
Get out of here. All right, let's move on to our QB8 and ADP over the last 5 years, Steve.
So,
Oh.
QB8, it's a legitimate dumpster fire, guys. The only reason the QB1s are worse is because you spend so much draft equity taking the consensus QB1 heading into a draft. But these guys, the last half decade that have been drafted as QB8s, just let me run off these numbers. QB21, QB23, QB20, QB19, QB29. All those guys are guys that you wouldn't even put them on your bench. They're waiver wire junk. I mean, an overall average of QB23 finish.
Yeah, I mean, even if my favorite quarterback falls to the ADP QB8 spot, I am going to have to stay away from him because it seems like at least over the past half decade, that ADP QB8 spot is kind of cursed or something.
Well, yeah, what is happening? I feel like we're thrift shopping now for quarterback, and these guys are supposed to be QB1s over the season.
Yeah.
I mean, what are we doing here? Okay, so let's take...
Who are we talking about as of today?
Okay, so as of today, the QB8, the dumpster fire for the 2019 season is Russell Wilson going early in the 7th round.
Here's why that's crazy. I mean, every year is different. Every player is different. Every circumstance is different. This is about aggregate overall probability. So any exception can happen. But what's crazy is that Steve's numbers tell us that if you end up being the ADP QB8, the chances are you're going to have a terrible, terrible season. Russell Wilson just got paid, and Russell Wilson just started acting crazy on social media, and now he's in this ADP QB8 spot. It kind of lines up.
No, Steve's data says you have 0 chance of having a successful fantasy season if you are the QB8 in drafts. 0%. And
You're right.
But Ben, wait, Russell Wilson has the savior in DK Metcalf. He's going to light up that offense and lead them to a top-end fantasy finish.
Yeah, well, I can't wait to get into the NFC West when it comes time for our preview pods. Actual QB8 finishers over the last 5 years have gone as early as the 601 spot, have gone as late as for free. The median and average range there is early to mid 11th round. So right now, the QB8 is going in the early 7th, when historically it says to get a return on your investment, you should really be doing that in the 11th. So again, should wait. It's not a positive ROI, and it's by multiple rounds. It's not even close.
So the QB8 basically is expensive junk.
Yeah.
That's what we've established here.
Yeah.
All right. Moving on to the QB9 in ADP over the last 5 years, Steve. Does it get any better?
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bump up here, guys. I mean, the average finish is QB 15 out of the QB 9. So, obviously that's nothing you want anything to do with. But in the last 2 years, we have seen Andrew Luck, who was getting drafted at the 804, finish as QB 6. And you also saw Kirk Cousins, who was getting drafted at the 802, finish right there at the QB 6 as well in 2017. But then when you do look at 2016, 15, 14, I mean, you see finishes that are QB 11, QB 40, QB 13, and you're not going to be happy necessarily making any of those picks. But at least what you can say at this point in time, we're talking about, early 8th, late 7th round. So at least you're not burying your fantasy team by missing on these guys. And then, of course, we can all agree that's kind of the whole point of this that we're making here tonight.
Right.
Yeah, but Ben, all right, hold on. Let me jump in here. But we're talking about the QB9 going in the 8th round. We've talked about how the top QB finishers every season go in that 8th, 9th round. So hitting on that pick is huge. That's the difference between a QB1 overall or a QB2 in general.
Yeah. And I mean, like you said, it's ROI numbers on average for the ADP QB9 are not there. It's happened to work out well over each of the last 2 years, but again, more often than not, it's still a little bit earlier than I want to draft them. And who are we even talking about this year at the QB9 spot, Jay?
This year is Carson Wentz. What an interesting person, because we just talked about Andrew Luck coming off of injury and beating his value as QB9 in ADPs and finishing as QB6, and Carson Wentz is coming off a little bit of an injury entering the 2019 season. And Ben's sitting here shrugging at me because he knows I'm pumping him up just because he's an Eagle.
I was going to say, sorry to bust your Eagles bubble there, but the actual fantasy QB9s over the past 5 seasons have been drafted anywhere from the middle of the 4th to absolutely free. And the acceptable range based on their midpoint and their average is anywhere from the 1009 to 1108. So once again, he's currently being drafted in the mid-8. Our data shows that you should really be targeting that type of fantasy producer a couple rounds later in the 10th or 11th. It's not a good decision.
Oh, God. Okay. We're down to the final 3. Please tell me there is some extreme value in this group, Steve. Tell me about the ADP QB10 over the last 5 years.
It's pretty gross. So
come on.
So the QB10s have had an average finish of QB20. So you had Jimmy G last year, finished as QB39. Cam Newton, who was the savior of the QB10s, finished as QB3 in 2017. And then looking at Eli Manning in 2016, you have quarterback 21, Sam Bradford in 2015, quarterback 24, and Tony Romo in 2014 finished as the QB 12, which isn't terrible at that point in time. But, like I said, when you look at the class of QB 10s collectively, it's not attractive.
That might have been the first Tony Romo nugget on this podcast.
Yes, it has.
Welcome to the show.
What's up, Tone? Anyways, once again, you're looking at a situation, even when you're getting down to the ADP QB 10, 80% of the time, you're not getting a QB 10 return on your investment. That is astounding to me, because this is where Steve's study really started to surprise me, because I had thought, you wait till the point of QB 10, you've done a good job being disciplined. You can really start to hone in and target your quarterbacks now, right? Not so fast based on his study when you're talking about an average of QB 20. And if not for Cam's QB 3 finish, it would have been a ton worse than that. So who are we talking about today as QB 10, Jay?
All right. As of today, going late in the 8th round is Jared Goff.
Man, so he's going at the 8-10 spot as of today on fantasyfootballcalculator.com and 12-team PPR settings. Everything we talk about in this podcast, Fantasy Foresight, is 12-team PPR redraft, so just remember that. And so actual QB 10 finishers over the last 5 years have been drafted anywhere from the late 6th to the late 10th. And the acceptable range based on their midpoint and their average is the late 8th to the mid 9th. And where is he going? He is going in the late 8th.
Yeah, so he's appropriately valued, but a guy going in that spot has an 80% chance of failing you and not living up to that spot.
Yeah, he does.
All right.
Yeah, so, even though you think you're being diligent, the study and the numbers show QB10 is still too early.
Look, I maybe I should save this for the end, but the message that is really coming through and starting to jump out at me, guys, is the fact that you should not pay attention to those ADPs. You should be looking at fantasyforesight.com and Total Foresight and trusting the numbers to find those guys where you draft and drafting them at appropriate positions and finding that true value.
Yeah, that's an outstanding point, Jay.
Okay, we're down to the final 2, and I can already tell QB11 and ADP over the last 5 years is a gigantic dumpster fire, and I cannot wait to hear about it.
Yeah, really, I was kind of hoping you'd make a little bit of an error, Jay, and just skip the QB11s, but because you did actually bring them up, we'll fire through it really quick. So, you have Matty Stafford last year. We all know he was a disappointment. Finishes quarterback 20. Andrew Luck. A lot of people were taking him at the QB11 in 2017 because there was a chance he could return a value because we were a little up in the air about that shoulder. Well, he didn't even play, so we'll just say he was QB 32, dead last. Then you have Phillip Rivers finishing QB 17. The year before that, people were selecting Ryan Tannehill QB 11.
Oh my.
Enough said. And then you had Cam Newton, who you'll notice his name's been up and down and all over this list because that's just how he plays quarterback in the NFL. And he finished as the QB 16 in 2014. So overall, not a single one of these guys provided you really even close to a return on investment as it pertains to where you were taking them in drafts.
Steve, you have walked us through some dirty, foul, nasty 5-year histories of some of these ADP QBs, okay? This by far is the dirtiest, nastiest, foulest of them all. ADP QB 11, no matter who that is, you need to avoid them, apparently.
All right, are you ready to hear who that is?
I am.
I didn't think it could get worse than the QB 8s. Apparently it can with the QB 11s in ADP. And this year, going as QB 11 currently in drafts in the early 9th round is one Cam Newton.
Makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And historically, over the last 5 years, the actual QB 11s have been drafted as early as the early 8th and as late as for free. Based on their midpoint and average, the appropriate value for targeting QB 11 production is anywhere from the early 11th to the mid 12th. And you're telling me that this year's ADP QB 11 is going once again 2 to 3 rounds prior to the acceptable range in the 9th round. Don't do it.
You're telling me the QB 11 has a 0% chance of returning a positive investment, and yet you're sticking me up. You're forcing me to overpay for that lack of production. No, thank you, good sir.
No, like I said, the worst on a bad list of 5-year history is this ADP QB 11 spot. It's the cursed spot. Avoid it at all costs.
All right, the final starting QB positions in 12-team formats, the QB 12 in ADP over the last 5 years, Steve. End us on a high note, please.
Well, gentlemen, if there was any more of a reason to argue for trying to wait as late as possible for your quarterback, this just would add fuel to that fire. So,
yeah, we've got good news.
Yeah, the QB 12s have actually had an average finish of QB 10. And I have to say, every single one of these guys has met or exceeded their average draft position. You had Phillip Rivers last season, finishes QB 11. You had Big Ben in 2017, finishes QB 7. You had Derek Carr in 2016, finishes the QB 8. Matty Stafford in 2015, finishes QB 12. And Phillip Rivers in 2014 finishes QB 10. So while you didn't have anybody jumping off the charts and having like an elite top 5-esque sort of season, you got great value out of this group. You got exactly what you paid for, if not more.
Yeah, I mean, you said it 100% of the time. The ADP QB 12 meets or exceeds the price that you have to pay for them. And at that point in your draft, if you have been diligently plucking best available wide receiver, running back the entire time, and you get exactly what you pay for or better from the quarterback position, at that point, that is the way to round out your team. And those are the solidly built top to bottom teams that are going to be in contention for the title at the end of the season.
I am flabbergasted. You're telling me the QB 11 has 0% chance of returning a positive investment, but the QB 12 has a 100% chance of returning a positive investment. That is just insane. Now that I've got that out of the way, you two and I need to have a discussion. Now I see why we did this entire series. It was for this episode to end it with this position. You're telling me the guaranteed player to return a positive investment on his draft position is rookie sensation, number 1 pick in the draft, early in the 9th round, quarterback Kyler Murray. I hate you both.
I am telling you that as of May 22nd, Jay. Don't worry. The hype train for this kid is going to be real. By the time we get to actual redraft season, he is going to be higher than QB 12, and somebody else can be in that lock it up ADP QB 12 spot. Now, when you turn it around and look at the actual QB 12 finishers over the last 5 seasons, they were were drafted as high as the middle of the 5th round and as late as for free. So when you look at the acceptable range of targeting QB12 production in your draft, you're looking at anywhere from based on the midpoint and the average, you should be looking anywhere from the middle of the 9th to the late 11th. So when you're telling me once again that the ADP QB12 is going in the middle of the 9th, actually that works in this case.
That seems like the safest pick that we've discussed the entire night. What a way to end this thing.
It's crazy how it can turn around from one position to another. And now we talked about this a couple episodes ago when we were discussing redraft relevant rookies at this point. And Kyler, at least for the first couple of weeks, is going to be pretty hard to figure out because everybody that I've heard talk about this kid that I respect that knows about football compares his athleticism to Mike Vick. And we talked about how his accuracy was comparable to Baker May, who is lights out accurate.
Get out of here. I think Phillip Rivers is the guy who sneaks into that QB12 and returns a back-end QB1 value. He's just that type of guy. He'll finish QB10 and just continue this trend of quality QB12 picks.
He was on Steve's list from the last 5 years in that spot before. He could definitely be there again this year.
And so, guys, before we do wrap this thing up, there are a few stats that really drives home the point of this entire pod tonight. So, as it pertains to trying to wait as late as you can possibly convince yourself in order to draft a quarterback in your 2019 draft. So, as it pertains to ADP versus actual finish, only 5 out of 25 of the guys finishing in that elite top 5 range, only 20% of them actually returned on investment. So they either met or exceeded where you're drafting them. That's not very good odds, obviously. And if you want to look at the entire group of 60 guys over this 5-year period of time, only 16 of them out of 60, 26.7% of the time did they meet or exceed where you were drafting them.
Wow.
And my goodness, out of those 16, 5 of them were QB12s. So, and then working it back on the flip side, when you look at it from a perspective of where are the quarterbacks, the actual finishers during this half-decade period, where were they being drafted? And that's where it's just really insane. So you look at the top 5, you have 25 quarterbacks, 11 of them were being drafted outside of QB1 status. We're talking guys that are going QB 13 or later. 11 of those guys finished in the top 5 over this period of time. And then also to speak to that, 27 of the 60 quarterbacks, 45%, I mean, we're talking almost half. These guys are being drafted outside of QB1 status, so QB 13 or later. So it's just like, you got to wait. Don't use a lot of draft equity shooting for the stars with these guys. You have just as low of odds of hitting on a quarterback than you do of any other position. But the other positions are so much more crucial to your roster.
Steve, you are 100% correct. And what I hear you saying is do not trust ADPs when it comes to the quarterback position. What you need to trust is the numbers, and this has been a 50-minute commercial for FantasyForesight.com. Do not believe the hype. Do not believe the ADP rankings. Believe the numbers, the tangible things you can see in order to prepare for your draft. Guys, what a presentation tonight. I hope everybody out there enjoyed it because I know I learned a lot.
Oh, yeah. Listen to us, people. This is how you maximize the draft capital of every one of your picks.
And not only that, but don't overpay for a quarterback.
Yeah, as early as the late 7th round at the absolute earliest. And then, that's got to be an exception type of deal.
Yep.
More often than not, we want you to wait until those double-digit rounds. We want you to wait until 12 quarterbacks have been drafted because a lot of those are going to be based on the perception from the previous season. And you need to focus on the reality and not the perception.
Well, guys, we did it. Steve, once again, welcome to the team. Everybody out there, go check out Steve's blog, now up on FantasyForesight.com under the Foresight Encyclopedia tab. You can check out all his great research now and all season long.
So, Steve, what'd you think of your first episode, buddy?
Ben, I had an absolute blast with this episode, and, I'm certainly looking forward to the rest of this series and future podcasts with you guys. But yeah, I had a blast.
Yeah, we loved having you, brother. We had a blast too, certainly. And I hope everybody out there enjoyed this episode because next week we're coming back at you with the running backs, and we're going to do the exact same study. Originally, we were thinking about doing 24. We might have to have a little post-episode meeting and cut that down to 12 based on the length of this episode. We'll see. But regardless, Steve's blog will have all 24, and we will be back with you next week. Can't wait.
And that wraps up this episode of Fantasy Foresight, the podcast. We thank you for joining us. Be sure to visit us, as always, at fantasyforesight.com. Use the links at the bottom of the page to find us across social media, including Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and wherever you pod. We hope you enjoyed the episode, and we'll see you next time.